Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of the Red Delta Project podcast, where we teach you how to maximize your results with minimalist strategies for diet and exercise. My name is Matt Schifferly, founder of the Red Delta Project, author of several books, including Grind Style Calisthenics and Smart Bodyweight Training. Today's episode is a part 2 continuation off of last week's episode, where I talked about my healthy eating manifesto. How healthy eating is about satisfying your appetites to remove the stresses that come from either being in a hypocaloric environment where you're not getting enough to eat, or a hypercaloric environment where you're eating too much. And healthy eating is also very different from eating right. Or eating right is basically saying, all right, we've got this one thing we're eating too much of, or this one rule that will help us eat a little bit better. Let's just follow that one rule, regardless of whether or not that's actually going to be the healthiest thing for you. One of the things you may have noticed in that episode is I didn't address a thing about weight loss or weight management. Sort of did with my 3 Ps and how portion control is a very important part of healthy eating, and that goes a long way in helping you lose and manage your weight, but it's not the one strategy that's going to work for everybody. Instead, I wanted to dedicate this episode to the idea that weight loss and weight control and a healthy diet are actually 2 very separate things. They should not be considered one and the same. And this is one of the best things that you can possibly do for both your chances to become and stay leaner and to have a healthy diet. Because when we put the 2 together, it can actually be counterproductive for both your health and wellness and for your weight loss goals. And a lot of people will ask me, well, if I do these healthy eating strategies, will I lose weight? And the answer is it depends on what kind of environment you're coming from. If you're coming from a hypocaloric environment where you've been very restrictive and not eating enough, you very well may gain a little bit of weight because now you're honoring your appetites and your hunger and your cravings and stuff. But if you're coming from a hypercaloric environment where you're eating too much and a lot of it is luxury calories that you're not really tasting and enjoying and stuff, and you're getting more aware of how little you need to be satisfied, you very well may cut back on how much you're eating and a lot of the foods that really aren't doing much for you. You may end up losing weight. But these are more of less side effects to getting to a healthier place with your diet. And weight gain or weight loss isn't exactly the objective that you're after, because the point of a healthy diet is to satisfy and support mind, body, and soul. And if your weight changes a little bit during that, so be it, but it's not really the objective you have. Instead, if you want to change your weight and manage it aggressively, then that's a totally different topic to use in addition to healthy eating, which I'll be talking about a little bit later in the episode. In fact, I have a free gift I want to give you, which outlines the incomplete thing in a free ebook. But first, I wanted to address why the other approach, eating right, may actually be one of the worst ways for you to manage your weight and can actually backfire on you and make you less healthy and even get you fatter in the long run. So on the surface though, a lot of eating right strategies make a lot of sense on paper, because for the most part, they're very reactive to observing that, hey, we're in a hypercaloric environment. We're eating way too much, we're fatter, we're sicker, we're weaker, we got all these problems. And then they step back and they look at the environment like, all right, so why are we in a hypercaloric environment here? Well, it's because of this kind of food, or we're eating too much of this and we're eating too much of that. And like, okay, then it makes sense to tell people eat less or to completely eliminate that kind of food from the diet. And that should pull us back into balance. And on paper, it sounds great. And over the course of human history, we've done this many times. In the olden days, it was actually spices and sauces and stuff, because we were eating a lot more due to our ability to make food more palatable due to like trade along the Silk Road. And then it was things with a higher calorie content like potatoes and stuff. We were able to farm it en masse. People were eating a lot of potatoes, a lot more caloric. So the weight loss advice back then was no potatoes. And then, of course, we've got pastries and baked goods that come across in the 1800s. And now, of course, we've got the highly processed foods and stuff. But the bottom line is it's always been the same. As we look at the environment, we're saying we're eating too many calories because of these influences. So minimize or mitigate those influences and we should be all good. And for the most part, it's not a terrible strategy. If you're eating too many processed foods, cutting back and replacing with more natural foods is definitely a good strategy and something I highly recommend. However, when we focus on a key influence that's causing or big influence to a hypercaloric environment, we set ourselves up for a number of serious pitfalls with this. The biggest one is what I call influential dependence, what I talk about in my book, Fitness Independence. So we observe that there's this big influence that's contributing to our current situation. And we say, all right, well, let's attack that single influence. Let's address that. And we can get some good results initially from doing just that, whatever it may be. But then we quickly fall into a trap where we think that's the one thing we've got to think about. That's where we should put all of our eggs in that one basket, is that one key influence. And that sets us up for ignoring a lot of the other influences that are still very important towards your objective, but by ignoring them, they can go all run higgly-piggly and backfire through compensation because we're putting too much influence there. It's kind of like a football coach saying, all right, everybody concentrate on the quarterback. What about the running back? Don't worry about him. He won't do anything. What about the wide receivers? They're nothing to worry about. Just concentrate on that one position and we'll win the game. And of course, then they get destroyed because the opposition figures out, oh, they're just going after the quarterback. Just feed it to the receivers all day and they'll just run up the score. And it's the same exact thing that's happened time after time after time within our fitness culture, is we identify a big influence that's contributing to a hypercaloric environment. We tell everybody that's the bad food, put all your eggs in that one basket, and then we ignore the other stuff that grows. And it happens with, the biggest example that people give is the fat thing. The fat phobia. There was a time where a lot of our hypercaloric environment was contributed because there was a lot of fat and a lot of junk food stuff. It wasn't always, but it was the case. So we're like, get fat out. But what ended up happening was we completely ignored sugar. We ignored the carbohydrates. And usually you find that in the rhetoric of eat right strategies, is they'll say, this is the thing to worry about. Don't worry about the other stuff. Worry about fat. Don't worry about sugar and carbs. Worry about sugar and carbs. Don't worry about fat. Worry about, macros. Don't worry about your calories. Worry about diet. Don't worry about your physical activity and exercise. Always beware of any sort of strategy that says something doesn't matter, because it always matters. There's not a single influence that is impowerful to your results. Some of them are small and they don't really have that much influence, so you don't need to worry about it too much. But everybody's influences are a little bit different. And that's why it's very important for you to take stock of your own influential balances in your own life. But when you get too focused on that one thing, you're basically leaving the back door wide open to be invaded from other areas. And that's one of the benefits of healthy eating, is it doesn't say this is the thing to worry about, don't worry about the other things. It says think and concentrate on everything. But don't be too obsessed with everything at the same time. Use it in a very balanced and holistic manner. There's a number of ways this happens. This compensation can happen from a number of sources. The first is corporate sources. It's like, what? People aren't buying bread. People aren't buying Twinkies. People aren't buying our junk food and stuff. Well, everybody's getting on this gluten-free kick. Oh, okay, then we'll just make gluten-free Twinkies. We'll make paleo pancakes. We'll make vegan candy bars. We'll make organic soda. Whatever the dietary rule is, we'll just figure out a way around it. Then we'll convince people that it's good for them, so they'll consume a lot more of it. We'll be able to charge 20% more, which is good for our bottom line. And people won't worry about, since they don't have any sort of restraint on that regard, then they'll just consume even more of it. Screw that. I don't care about health food. I care about eating food in a healthy way. You can't sell a healthy diet. You can't sell healthy food unless it's literally coming from the ground. You don't see too many advertisements these days for apples and spinach. But when it comes to processed foods of any kind, they're like, well, we'll just figure out a way around that one loophole, and there we go. We're good. The other ways that this kind of compensation happens is personal, too. At first, you adopt whatever eat right strategy is going on and you feel restricted. You feel the stress of, I can't have my favorite foods and stuff. But then you go to Whole Foods and you go to the grocery store and you find the things that do work within that loophole. You find the organic candy and the sugar-free cookies and the organic sodas and other things like that. You find it on the internet. You find vegan recipes for all the things that you think you can't have, because it's the ultimate sales tool. It's like, let's make something that people think they can't have, but because it conforms to that one rule, now we can convince them that they can eat it and they'll love us for it, even if it's rather something that's processed all the more. Your body also goes through a lot of this stuff too. Your gut bacteria changes for how you're digesting stuff. Your taste buds change for how you enjoy your foods. So the foods you crave and dislike, that all changes as well. So there's a lot of this adaptation. I'm not saying it's just one entity that's making it happen, but the bottom line is to recognize that whenever you're in a hypercaloric environment due to a given influence and you take that influence out, your body, your mind, your lifestyle, corporate America, everything around you is going to find some way to get you back to baseline. Because ultimately, any weight loss strategy is a weight maintenance strategy. That's because your body adapts and changes, and you adopt different habits and behaviors, ultimately to get back to homeostasis. Homeostasis is the end goal. It is the end result of every sort of diet and exercise program you will ever be on. No matter what you're doing and how you're doing it, you're ultimately telling your body, get back to a balanced state under these new conditions. So you go through all of these changes to get back to baseline. And baseline is great because you get to do things like survive and live in this new environment that you now found yourself in, which was actually a threat to your health and livelihood. But the problem is, once you're back to baseline, you stop changing. You don't lose any more weight. It doesn't matter if you still have weight to lose, but you figured out how to get back into either baseline or maybe even a hypercaloric environment on the paleo diet or vegan or organic or whatever type of thing that you're on. You made a restriction, you got pulled in one direction, then you were able to compensate and your body made changes and stuff, and it brought you back here because it's stressful to be in a hypocaloric environment. And if all you're doing is you're basing your dietary practice on a single rule or a collection of dogmatic rules, then it's very easy to get pulled back into a hypercaloric environment because you're just following those rules. That's the only thing you're basing your plan on, which can be very short-sighted. And this is where healthy eating comes into play. It doesn't go on any sort of rule that can be manipulated against you. It doesn't work with any sort of corporate agenda. It doesn't work with any sort of names or titles or packaging things that you could say all natural, whatever on it. I don't care. It could be natural, sugar-free, alcohol-free, fat-free. None of that matters to me anymore. I look at a cookie, it could be a paleo, natural, organic, dolphin-safe cookie or Chips Ahoy. To me, they're the exact same thing. They're cookies because my body responds to them the exact same way. It's a cookie. How does it taste? How does it feel? How does it satisfy my appetites and take the stress off mind and body? It's going to be the same thing, and it doesn't matter what loophole it fits into, which is why healthy eating strategy doesn't allow you to focus on one thing while everything else can compensate. It focuses on everything, but nothing at the same time, so you can find that balance and equilibrium that's going to keep you healthy and in that homeostasis. Now you might be thinking, yeah, but isn't the homeostasis a bad thing? Well, when it comes to a dietary standpoint, no, because homeostasis is the point where you have the least amount of stress. It's where you're healthiest, it's where you're sanest, it's where you have the least amount of stress regarding diet and food. So when you're at that point, you're in your best position to make changes and adjustments if you want to. It's like having a very firm, stable launch pad. It's something you can bounce off of and project off of and then return to. So that's why I developed the strategy known as calorie hacking. Calorie hacking is very different from eating right, and it's very different from trying to use some sort of strategy to improve the health of your diet. The whole point of calorie hacking is specific for weight loss, nothing else. It's not about being healthy, it's not about improving your diet, it's not about any of that stuff. It's about saying, all right, you've taken the healthy eating strategy and gotten back to that baseline and homeostasis. Good, do that first. Worry about getting a healthy diet first. Once you get your diet kind of established and you're feeling good and healthy, then you can start to hack. And calorie hacking is basically what it sounds like. You're at a baseline And there's a number of strategies you can use to basically hack and cut a big chunk of calories out of your body in a single shot. It's hard, it's stressful, just like a workout. It's a bit of a challenge, but it's also short term. It's not like a diet or a lifestyle that you have to like, oh gosh, I'm gonna be on this for the rest of my life or anything. It's something you can do in an afternoon or over the course of a couple of days. And I won't go too much into the strategies right now because I want to give you my ebook on calorie hacking, which has all the strategies laid out. If you're watching on YouTube, the link is down below. I'll have a link to the post, to the ebook on the post on the Red Delta Project. If you look for the same video in the blog post, it'll have a link to it as well. But the basic idea is there's a number of ways you can do it. The most popular way to do it is fasting. That's very popular these days. You have 24-hour fasts and stuff, 16-hour fasts. Just skipping a meal. That's a simple way to go about it. I skipped breakfast today. Okay, good. There's also great significant reduction in portion control. So if you're usually eating so much portion, cut it in half. And there you go. You can also do it through calorie expenditure. It's a little bit harder, but it is possible. Like yesterday, I rode 100 miles on my bike. It took me 8 hours. I mean, can you imagine doing 8 hours of cardio? That was a huge amount of caloric expenditure. Not saying it needs to be that extreme, but it's a amount of physical activity that's big enough that you're like, oh yeah, I burned a lot of calories there. But the point of a calorie hack is that it's short-term and temporary. So it doesn't kick off a homeostatic shift to your new strategy. You skip a meal, you skip eating for a day, you do a huge amount of cardio, like, you know, a 3-hour spin class or something, but then you go right back to your baseline. And that's why it's so important to have that established first, because a lot of times when people are fasting or they're trying to do these other things to lose weight, they inadvertently compensate afterwards. They have just a little bit more at each meal, and over the next couple of days, they've basically put back what they burned off, even though they did that fast or whatever. When you're at a baseline, you know what is normal. You know what a normal caloric intake is. So when you go with a hack, you know immediately like, wow, that's a lot of stuff I'm not eating. Or that was a huge amount of calorie burn or calorie restriction. You don't have to count anything. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to do anything very special as far as extra habits. You don't have to measure or read food labels or anything. It should be big enough that it's very self-evident of, wow, that was a lot more different than what I'm used to. And then you go right back to what you are used to with your healthy eating strategy. And that ensures that you don't overcompensate and put the weight back on or the calories back on that you just hacked out. So the strategy is very simple. Is healthy eating strategy is your foundation, and that's where you spend most of your time. And if you want to manage and lose weight, then you turn to calorie hacking in addition to it, in order for that where you're not relying on eating right or being susceptible to influential over-reliance and dependency, because then you've got compensation and you're all over the place with a higgledy-piggledy. Again, if you want to learn more about calorie hacking, the ebook link is down below here on YouTube or on the blog post at reddeltaproject.com. And as always, I want to hear from you. Comments, questions down below here on the YouTube comments. I'll respond to everybody in due time. If you have any other things to request for future videos, I'm always open for that as well. Talk to you next week. Till then, be fit, live free.